Hey everyone, welcome back. It's February 6th, 2025. And, well, the news cycle never stops turning, does it? We've got three articles from the Videntis today that we're going to dive into. Some pretty big stuff happening both here in the U.S. and around the world.
Definitely a lot to unpack. We've got billionaires potentially wielding a lot of influence, international agreements with big implications, and even some rumblings of a shakeup in the Democratic Party. Should be an interesting deep dive.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hear your take on all of this. So let's jump right in. Our first article is titled, Billionaires' Wealth Concentration Threatens Core Democracy, Experts Warn. And right off the bat, we see Senator Bernie Sanders issuing a pretty dire warning about the U.S. potentially becoming an oligarchy.
Right, and that's a term we hear thrown around sometimes, but it's worth clarifying for our listeners. An oligarchy is essentially a system where power is concentrated in the hands of a very small elite group, often based on wealth or family ties. So Sanders is arguing that the growing influence of billionaires in the Trump administration is pushing the U.S. in that direction.
Okay, and he's got some specific examples to back up that claim, like Elon Musk heading up the Department of Government Efficiency, which they've nicknamed DOGE. It's an interesting choice, to say the least.
It is unusual to have someone with Musk's, business interests in such a prominent government position. And when you consider that he spent a significant amount of money to help get Trump elected, it does raise some questions about potential conflicts of interest.
Yeah, I mean, is he serving the public good or is he serving his own agenda? Especially when you consider the combined wealth of Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg. It's actually greater than the wealth of 170 million Americans. That's a pretty mind-boggling number.
It is, and that kind of gets to the heart of Sanders' concerns. He's arguing that this level of wealth concentration gives these individuals an outsized influence on policy decisions. They have incredible lobbying power. They can influence media narratives through ownership like Bezos with the Washington Post. It really does tip the scales in their favor.
And Sanders isn't just talking about this in a theoretical sense. He's actually drawing a direct connection to potential real-world consequences. He mentions possible cuts to social programs that could disproportionately affect vulnerable populations. Programs like Medicaid Head Start and Meals on Wheels.
Exactly. So this isn't just a philosophical debate about political systems. This is about how policy decisions driven by a select few can have a very tangible impact on the lives of everyday people.
Okay, so we've got billionaires potentially wielding a lot of influence here in the U.S. Let's shift gears now and look at how power dynamics are playing out on the international stage with our next article. Guatemala boosts deportee flights by 40% in new U.S. deal. This one focuses on Secretary of State Marco Rubio's recent trip to Central America.
Yeah, this new deal it's an interesting one. It basically boils down to Guatemala agreeing to increase the number of flights taking deportees back to Central America. Not just their own citizens, but they're also accepting individuals from other countries. And the U.S. is footing the bill for these flights.
So it seems like the U.S. is trying to streamline the deportation process, particularly for migrants from countries like Venezuela, where direct deportations have been a bit more complicated.
Right. And on the surface, it might look like a win-win. The U.S. gets a more efficient deportation system. Guatemala gets some economic benefits. But, we have to consider the potential downsides as well.
You're talking about the ethical and legal questions surrounding these third country deportations.
Right. Exactly. I mean, are we ensuring the safety and well-being of these individuals who are being sent to a country they may not be familiar with or have any connection to? There are international laws and treaties that protect refugees and asylum seekers, and this deal definitely needs to be scrutinized to ensure those standards are being upheld.
And it's not just about the deportation process itself. Guatemala is also planning to establish a new border security force to try and combat transnational crime. And there's even talk of a high-level Guatemalan delegation coming to Washington to discuss economic development strategies. So it seems like they're really taking a multifaceted approach to this whole issue.
It's definitely a complex situation with a lot of moving parts. This deal is just one piece of a much larger puzzle when it comes to U.S. Central America relations and immigration policy.
All right, so we've got billionaires potentially shaping policy in the U.S. and complex international agreements impacting migration flows. Now for our final article, let's turn our attention to the potential for change within the U.S. political landscape with Progressive Challenger Targets Pelosi, Upping Democratic Ranks. This one caught my eye because it involves a former aide to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez challenging Nancy Pelosi for her congressional seat.
Yeah, this is a pretty bold move. Saikat Chakrabarty was instrumental in AOC's own surprising primary victory, and now he's arguing that Pelosi and the Democratic establishment are out of touch and ineffective against an increasingly aggressive Republican Party.
That's a big accusation. especially considering Pelosi's long and powerful career in politics. What's Chakrabarty bringing to the table that he thinks makes him a better choice?
Well, he's definitely positioning himself as a true progressive. He's highlighting his role in the development of the Green New Deal and is co-founding of the Justice Democrats, which is a progressive political action committee.
So he's got the progressive credentials.
Yeah.
But can he actually unseat someone like Pelosi?
It's a tough battle for sure. Pelosi has deep ties to the party, a proven track record, and a lot of fundraising power. But Chakrabarty's campaign is tapping into this growing sense of urgency among progressive voters who are demanding bolder action on issues like climate change and economic inequality.
So this race is about more than just two individuals. It's really a reflection of this larger debate happening within the Democratic Party about its direction and its strategy for winning elections.
Exactly. And it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. You know how this resonates with voters?
Yeah.
If Sanders is right about this potential slide toward oligarchy, what can everyday citizens do to safeguard democracy?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, it can feel pretty overwhelming sometimes when you think about the scale of these issues.
It's easy to feel powerless, but I actually think awareness is the first step. We need to be informed about how wealth can be translated into political power, through things like lobbying campaign contributions, even funding think tanks that shape policy narratives.
So knowledge is power, as they say. But what about taking action? What can people actually do to make a difference?
Well, there are a lot of things. We can start by supporting candidates who align with our values. We can get involved with grassroots organizations that are working on issues we care about. And we can hold our elected officials accountable by contacting them, voicing our concerns, and participating in the political process.
So it's about being engaged citizens, not just passive observers.
Exactly. And it's not just about national politics either. Think about local elections, school board races. Those have a huge impact on our communities as well.
Absolutely. All right, so we've talked about the potential influence of billionaires, we've explored the complexities of international agreements, and we've delved into the dynamics of a potentially game-changing election within the Democratic Party. What's standing out to you from all of this?
For me, it's the interconnectedness of these stories. The concentration of wealth, international relations, domestic politics. These aren't isolated events. They're all woven together, influencing and shaping one another.
It's like a ripple effect. One action leads to another, and those consequences spread outward, impacting individuals, communities, and even entire nations.
Yeah, and that's why it's so crucial to look beyond the headlines, to dig deeper and understand these complex connections. It's the only way to make informed decisions and engage in meaningful conversations about the future we want to create.
Well said. These articles from the Videntis have certainly given us a lot to think about. They've shed light on some serious challenges, but they've also highlighted the potential for positive change if we're willing to engage in a thoughtful and constructive way.
Absolutely. And, it's important to acknowledge that while these issues might seem overwhelming at times, it's so important not to give in to that sense of apathy or helplessness. Every single one of us has a role to play in shaping the future, right? Whether it's staying informed, having conversations with friends and family, or participating in the political process in whatever way we can. Every action matters.
And remember, progress isn't always linear. It's often messy and full of setbacks. But the key is to stay engaged, keep learning, and never give up on the pursuit of a more just and equitable world.
Now, before we wrap up, is there anything else that stands out to you from these articles? Any final insights you'd like to share with our listeners?
What strikes me is that these stories really underscore the fragility of democracy. It's not something we can just take for granted. It requires constant vigilance, active participation, and a willingness to challenge those who would seek to undermine it for their own gain.
That's a powerful point. The future isn't predetermined. It's shaped by the choices we make, the actions we take, and the conversations we have.
Exactly. So let's not be passive bystanders. Let's be active participants in shaping the world we want to live in. Let's stay informed, engage in critical thinking, and never stop asking questions. Yeah, it's a good reminder that we all have a responsibility to protect and strengthen our democratic institutions.
Absolutely. And I think that's where platforms like the Videntis come in. They provide us with the information we need to be informed citizens and engage in these crucial conversations.
I couldn't agree more. Okay, so let's do a quick recap. Today we explored three major stories from the Videntis. We started by examining Senator Sanders' concerns about the growing concentration of wealth and its potential threat to democracy.
Right. Then we shifted gears to look at the new U.S.-Guatemala deal, and we talked about the potential benefits and drawbacks of that agreement for both countries.
And finally, we dove into the world of politics And we analyzed the implications of a progressive challenger taking on Nancy Pelosi for her congressional seat.
Yeah, and throughout our discussion, we saw how these seemingly separate stories are actually intertwined. They reflect broader trends and power dynamics that are shaping our world.
It's been a fascinating deep dive. And now I'm curious, what are some key takeaways our listeners should keep in mind as they continue to engage with these issues?
I'd say one of the most important things is to stay informed and to be discerning consumers of information. Don't just accept everything you read or hear at face value. Question assumptions, consider different perspectives, and form your own conclusions.
It's about being critical thinkers.
Yeah.
Not just passive absorbers of information.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to have those tough conversations with friends, family, and colleagues. The more we can engage in respectful dialogue and try to understand different viewpoints, the better equipped we'll be to address these complex challenges.
And remember, even small actions can make a difference. Whether it's voting in elections, volunteering in your community, or simply having those conversations with the people around you, every bit counts.
Absolutely. The key is to find ways to get involved that feel meaningful to you and to stay engaged for the long haul. These issues aren't going away anytime soon, and it's going to take sustained effort from all of us to create the kind of world we want to live in.
Well said. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into today's news, I want to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. If Sanders is right about the threat to democracy posed by the growing concentration of wealth, what concrete steps can we take as individuals and as a society to safeguard our democratic institutions and ensure a more just and equitable future for all?
That's a question that deserves our continued attention and action. It's not a simple answer, but it's a conversation we need to keep having.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the news and for engaging with these important issues. We encourage you to check out the Videntis for ongoing coverage and analysis. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep learning.